Final Fantasy is one of the most popular franchises in video game history. Wait a minute. If I'm going to be talking about Final Fantasy here, I should be playing Final Fantasy music. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, so where was I? Okay, Final Fantasy is one of the most popular franchises in video game history, as well as one of the longest running franchises in video game history. These games have little to no connection with each other, but what if there was? In this video, we're going to take a look at certain aspects, themes, and traits in Final Fantasy games, and I'm going to connect them to the best of my abilities. So without further ado, let's get into it. First, let's examine some characters that reoccur in Final Fantasy games, starting with Cid. Now, the character Cid varies in every game, but for the most part, the characters have similar traits. Let's start with the OG Final Fantasy, where it all began. Cid does not appear in the original NES version. He is mentioned briefly in the remakes. Cid is described as the ancient Lufinian creator of the airships the Warriors of Light use. In Final Fantasy II, the original Cid, he began his career as one of Finn's knights, but later acquired an airship and left Finn's service to seek out his own fortune. Cid offers taxi service with his airship to Firion and the party. In Final Fantasy III, Cid Hayes is the creator of the airships on the floating continent for the village of Canon. He transforms the sailing ship into an airship, and later helps save the Warriors of Light from Zan. In the 3D remake version, he will occasionally attack with a hammer or a fire spell on all the enemies, in the short time he accompanies the party. In Final Fantasy IV, Cid Polendina is a playable character and is the first playable Cid in the series. The head of Baron's Corps of Engineers, Cid is both a friend and mentor to Cecil and Rosa. He designs the airships used by Baron's elite Red Wing Corps, but develops misgivings about the king of Baron's methods. Cecil and Kain exile, and the use of the Red Wings destroy Damcyan prove to be more than Cid can tolerate. He rebels against the king and is imprisoned for treason. He is later freed by Cecil, therefore joining his party. So you start to see here a common theme with the Cid characters: airships. Whether it's creating them, altering them, or flying them. Not to mention, Cid in Final Fantasy III and IV both use hammers as weapons. In Final Fantasy V, Cid Priva and his grandson Mid are engineers from Karnak who invented the machine which amplifies the power of the crystals. In particular, the use of the fire crystal to build the firepower ship for Queen Karnak. The two later remodeled the airship found in the catapult. In Final Fantasy VI, Cid del Norte Marquez is a non-playable character who invented Magitech technology for the Empire, a broad technological category that includes powered armor, weapons, and even pseudo-genetic engineering, all stemming from the extraction of magical essence from espers. Here you see the common theme amongst the Cids here is that they are engineers and have a vast knowledge of technology. In Final Fantasy VII, Cid Highwind is a playable character, a gifted mechanic and pilot. He constructs several of the vehicles used by the party in Final Fantasy VII, including the tiny Bronco and the appropriately named airship, the Highwind. In Final Fantasy VIII, Cid Kramer is the Balamb Gardens headmaster, where Squall Leonhardt is a student. Cid provides Squall and his seedy companions the training that they need to defeat a powerful sorceress. Cid reveals to Squall that Balamb Gardens is capable of flight. fulfilling his traditional role as a Cid to provide the player with a flying form of transportation. In Final Fantasy IX, Cid Fabul is briefly playable during a non-battle sequence. He is the regent of the city-state of Lindblum. Appropriately, a city of accomplished engineers, mechanics, and airship pilots. So I think you get my point here. All, if not most, of the Cids in Final Fantasy have a common theme to them. And I know what you're probably thinking. How can they be related if they don't share the same surname? Well, think about this. If you look at your family tree, not everyone shares the same last name as you. In this case, every Cid could be a descendant of one another, even though they don't share the same last name. There are some reoccurring characters that make appearances throughout the series, including Biggs and Wedge, Gilgamesh, Moogles, and the most popular reoccurring characters throughout the series, you guessed it, Chocobos. These lovable bird creatures have been featured in almost every single Final Fantasy game, starting with Final Fantasy II. They have appeared in every game in the series in some capacity. As a mainstay, they could be considered the mascot of the series. Chocobos are generally depicted as yellowish-orange birds with 3-toed feet, large wings, and long necks. Later games have made the yellow variety a common breed and introduced other types characterized by different colors. While the yellow chocobo is flightless, stronger breeds can swim and even fly. Common variations include black chocobo, red chocobo, blue chocobo, and the chocobo breed universally regarded as the strongest, the gold chocobo. Other games depict different colors such as green, white, silver, brown, and purple. Chocobo breeding is a side quest in several games, as stronger breeds are able to fly and swim and can reach optional areas that the airship cannot. The ruler of the chocobo is the fat chocobo, a rather plump chocobo capable of human speech who possesses varying degrees of magical powers over lesser chocobos. These birds are one of the biggest strings that I think would hold and tie the whole series together. It would be difficult to have these exact creatures exist in every single universe and not have them to be canon with each other. One theme that I think that is an even bigger tie in the whole timeline, more than chocobos, is magic. In the Final Fantasy series, magic is the biggest common denominator, whether it's acquired naturally through crystals or from magical beings known as espers or summons. Magic is usually divided into two categories, black magic and white magic. Black magic is typically reserved for damaging your opponents, whereas white magic is typically used for healing yourself or your companions. Over time, some of the white magic has been split into a separate category called time magic. Every Final Fantasy game has an element of magic. Some include summons where you conjure up a creature to attack your enemies. The idea of crystals has been a big storyline in the Final Fantasy world since its origins. The first Final Fantasy first introduced the idea of the crystal magic story to the world and has been a staple for most of the games in the series. In Final Fantasy VI, crystals are replaced with magicite, which is magic in a tangible form. Some magic has been a huge player for the whole Final Fantasy series. I would say this is a huge factor in bringing the whole series to one single timeline. One of the major antagonistic elements in Final Fantasy VII was the Shinra Electric Company. Shinra was a megacorporation that obtained military power over the world by controlling the world's energy supply by converting the life stream of the planet into Mako energy. The company was run and controlled by President Shinra. In Final Fantasy X-2, there is a young alpha-head boy genius named Shinra, whom when approached triggers a cutscene where he says the following.
The more I study it, the more fascinating it gets. There's limitless energy swirling around in there.
Limitless energy?
The life force that flows through our planet, I think. With a little work, we could probably extract the energy in a usable form.
Shinra also states that such work would take generations to perfect, leading to believe that the young Shinra in Final Fantasy X-2 is the ancestor of the Shinra Corporation's founder in Final Fantasy VII. Further confirmation for this connection found in the official Ultimania Omega for Final Fantasy X-2, when scenario writer Kazushi Ujima stated after quitting the Gullwings, Shinra received enormous financial support from Rin and began trying to use Venegun to siphon Mako energy from the far plane, but he is unable to complete the system for utilizing this energy in this generation and in the future. When traveling to distant planets becomes possible, the Shinra company is founded on another world, or something like that. That would happen about 1,000 years after this story, I think. Finally, Ujima officially confirmed that Final Fantasy X-2's timeline is set around 1,000 years before the events of Final Fantasy VII, even though it's set on a different planet. The Fireflies are a naturally occurring phenomenon that are most prominent in Final Fantasy X and X-2. The Fireflies can sometimes take the form of the spirit's disembodied life force during or after death. The connections to the life force seen in Final Fantasy VII are strongly suggested in their nature. Strong concentrations of Fireflies can crystallize into spheres in the same way that Mako forms into materia. Spheres were the original name for materia before it was changed during development. Fireflies are also able to manifest the physical embodiment of the deceased, form especially if the deceased has a strong will and unfinished business. Aerith and Zack are able to take a spirit-like form during the final scenes in Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, and Sephiroth's will allowed himself to manifest into 3 silver-haired men using a combination in Final Fantasy VII Advent Children during Kadash's passing. Small glowing orbs that resemble the Fireflies can be seen when he's reaching out for Aerith and dissolves into the life stream. Interestingly, another Square Enix RPG, Vagrant Story, also features glowing orbs of light in the same manner. As I mentioned earlier about Cid Highwind, Ricard Highwind appeared in Final Fantasy II and was the first Dragoon in the Final Fantasy series. Ricard's hometown was an island called Diast, which was meant to be the birthplace of the Dragoons. Unfortunately, due to persistent attacks from the Pale Mansion Empire, Ricard was the last surviving member. In Ricard's hometown of Diast, you meet a young boy named Cain that mentions he wants to become a Dragoon too, just like his father. In the Nintendo DS version of Final Fantasy IV, one of the game's major protagonists, the Dragoon Cain, kindly states that his father was also a Dragoon named Ricard that died during a fight with the evil Empire. Speaking of Dragoons, localized as Dragon Knight or Lancer, is a reoccurring job in the Final Fantasy series, first appearing in Final Fantasy II. They have become one of the most iconic job classes in the series. In their first appearance, Dragoon was not a job, but there was a group of dragon riders that fought alongside wyverns. The Empire killed off most of the group out of fear, only leaving Ricard Highwind and his adopted son, Cain. Later releases gave Ricard equal proficiency with spears, having him join with a spear equipped and provide spears as his ultimate weapon. Additionally, his appearance was overwritten to be more similar to Cain's. In Final Fantasy IV, Cain Highwind is a dragoon and the leader of a group of dragoons in the service of Baron, following in the footsteps of his father, who also commanded the dragoons as one himself, therefore cementing the connection between Final Fantasy II and IV. The connection between Final Fantasy III and Final Fantasy VIII strongly suggests that they are in the same world, but at a different time period. The strongest connection comes from an antagonistic character in Final Fantasy III named Hein. Hein was a sorcerer who usurped King Argus and held him captive. He was defeated by the 4 Heroes of Light, breaking his control over the floating continent and the castle's inhabitants. In Final Fantasy VIII, there is a legend of a great sorcerer named Hein who created mankind and the first sorcerer. Eventually, he became to resent the humans and try to destroy them, resulting in a multi-year battle and eventually surrendering. The world map in both games have some similarities, with any differences in landmass naturally occurring over thousands of years. As an example, Final Fantasy VIII's Underwater Research Center is located in the same area where the floating continent resided. The ruins in the facility indicate that an ancient civilization once lived there. Where else has there been a floating continent mentioned in a Final Fantasy game? Oh yes, Final Fantasy VI. Is that the same floating continent? Probably not. The Far Plane in Final Fantasy X is seen as a resting place for the dead as a location in the world of Spira, located underground miles beneath the surface. Visitors to the Far Plane are able to conjure up and communicate with manifestations of the dead through their own memories. The legend behind the Promised Land in Final Fantasy VII shares many similarities to the Far Plane, as being the final resting places of the deceased. But unlike the Far Plane, it is more of a pseudo-mythical place that only the Cetra could communicate with. It is likely that the confirmed connection of Final Fantasy X and VII, that the legend of the Far Plane became the Promised Land, and the Cetra, who were originally the Alp Ahead, were themselves searching for a new home like the Far Plane. It's also confirmed by Shinra from Final Fantasy X that energy from the Far Plane and the Promised Land could be used to power cities and technology. The 4 fiends, Lik, Marilith, Tiamat, and Kraken, make a return, as does Final Fantasy's main antagonist, Garland, at the end of the first game. He promised to extract his revenge. The Final Fantasy IX character, Mikoto, stated at one point in the game that Garland had already once tried to take control of this cycle of souls by force, but failed. A possible reference to how Garland used the Dark Crystal in the original game to create a time loop. Some fans have drawn comparisons between Final Fantasy XIII's Linzai and Final Fantasy VII's Genova. Linzai was a deity created by the Maker and was responsible for creating the Falsai of Cocoon. So it stands to reason that she has the power of the Falsai. The more power the Falsai have, the more power they have to control and manipulate humans to do their bidding. Genova's powers of manipulation and mind control are very well documented by now. Linzai is referred to as the mother of the Falsai orphan. whose intention was to use Cocoon as a meteor to crash into Pulse, much like what Genova did in Gaia. Lindsay was referred to as a trickster, a demon, and a succubus that enslaved and manipulated her followers. She was originally described as a female mothering type of character, that her true form remains a mystery, and that the statue is a representation of her. Much like Genova's female-looking doll effigy in FF7. While the descriptions could be used to describe pretty much every evil female character in mythology, it does draw some interesting comparisons. Links between Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI can be made if you consider that the War of Magi was the war that occurred during the events of Final Fantasy IV. It's possible the Warring Triad descending to the world were a reference to the three unnamed but powerful entities known as the Lunarians. One strong story linking these games occurs during the tale of the War of Magi, when the Esper named Odin tried to defend the ancient castle from invaders but was defeated by an unknown sorcerer. In Final Fantasy IV, Odin, who was also known as the King of Baron, was supposedly killed by Cagnazzo. It is possible that he may have been instead killed by Golbez, but with the aid of Cagnazzo, which would explain who the mysterious sorcerer was from the legend told from Final Fantasy VI. In addition, the Baron Castle has many architectural similarities to the ancient castle. The maps of the two seem to share many similarities. In the Baron Castle basement of the map is located where Final Fantasy VI's Figaro Castle is now situated. Interestingly, Figaro Castle features an optional side quest, which takes you to an ancient castle, possibly a relic of the Baron's castle, and it contains the magicite Odin. That seems to be direct parallel to the events of Final Fantasy IV. Now that it has been confirmed that an interdimensional void rift exists as a way of connecting all the worlds and universes of the Final Fantasy series, it helps explain what seems to be a random villain appearing in Final Fantasy 3, 5, and 9. Necrophobe made his appearance in Final Fantasy 3 and could be encountered in the interdimensional rift. An entity known as the Cloud of Darkness emerged from the same rift and attacked the party in Final Fantasy IX. Finally, Necro appeared as a final boss in Final Fantasy IX. All three versions of the entity resulted in someone sacrificing themselves or defending your party during battle in order to weaken them. The link between Necro and Necrophobe seems to be the most obvious from a visual perspective, as well as the similarities in the name. But it's interesting to know that Necro's original name was supposed to be the Eternal Darkness, which reads similarly to the Cloud of Darkness. Final Fantasy VIII and 15 share some similarities in terms of technology and the way it handles magic. Drawing magic, which is quite similar to how the junctioning system works in Final Fantasy VIII. There are references to the Weapons Monthly magazine that contains recipes for weapon combinations from Final Fantasy VIII. Perhaps the most interesting reference is the Solomon Ring from Final Fantasy VIII, a game that was released 15 years before Final Fantasy XV's release date. The descriptions for the rings state that the legend goes that it was a ring that belonged to a royal family. While the information could be written off as a pure coincidence, both the Solomon Ring and the Lucci Ring share more than a passing resemblance. Also, the biblical version of Solomon's Ring gave the wearer the ability to command good and evil spirits, just like Lucci did with the kings of Lucci. Eidolons, icons, espers, summons, they go by many names. These creatures and deities could be the primary link that connects all of the Final Fantasy games. Some fans think that Bahamut, Ifrit, Shiva, and the others are beings in essence of magic drawn from a dimension that is connected to all the worlds in the games. Lastly, for fans of the series, Final Fantasy Dissidia was something of a dream game. It combined most of the series' most popular heroes and villains and pitted them against each other in a battle between Chaos and Cosmos. The warriors from both sides are summoned through various gateways that acted as portals that connected each other to the Rift and other realms. It's the same void and rift that Gilgamesh has traveled through to enter different Final Fantasy worlds at various times throughout the series. The game's director Takahashi Arakawa, along with the character designer Tetsuro Nomura, and the original Final Fantasy VII director Yoshitsune Kitsai, all confirmed that Dissidia's story is canonical to the entire series, confirming once again the connection between all the Final Fantasy worlds and universes. What do you guys think of this theory? Do you agree with any of them? Do they make sense? Let me know in the comments below. Like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter @BlackOmen10, and I'll see you all in the next one.